Everyone, thank you very much, and we're delighted to finally turn on the lights in this beautiful place. I hope everybody sees the new light fixtures that we have here and how really awesome they are. I was sitting about where the gentleman, Lee Terry, was sitting looking at Mrs. Slaughter, and I saw that halo over her head.
I'm worried about showing all our wrinkles. I'm
yeah.
concerned about that.
Well, the chat.
Ages faster or anything.
We need to get the chaplain up here fast then, Louise, because I think you're really doing great. But I want to welcome everybody back, including the colleagues on both sides of the aisle, for taking time not only to be here for this important meeting, but a welcome back after some necessary and needed time at home and an opportunity to recharge our batteries with our constituents. Today we welcome back the second session of the 113th Congress, and today we have three important pieces of legislation that will be before the committee. First, the committee will consider H.R. 3362, the Exchange Information Disclosure Act, and H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. Each of these bills provide for increased transparency into the newly formed online health care exchanges. First, H.R. 3362 requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to publish weekly reports on the number of individuals enrolled through the exchanges, as well as any potential problems experienced during enrollment and how those problems are going to be addressed. Additionally, the reports will include very critical information about who is serving as navigators, certified applicant consultants, agents, and brokers, so that the American people, and perhaps most of all members of Congress, can have confidence as they receive quality advice from certified professionals. This legislation takes simple yet important steps to ensure that all Americans can easily determine whether their tax dollars are being spent appropriately. When I spent 16 years in the private sector in a large company, granted, but I received daily information about the work that I provided and was able to share that information with my team. Daily information in the running of secure and safe businesses is important, and I'm sure that today, now some 18 years later, that the federal government could at least get up to snuff with that opportunity, as now the government, through the Secretary of Health and Human Services, is running a critical business, needs to know what is happening and occurring in that business, share timely information so that people that may not be in full support but can operate off the facts of the case that the Secretary would provide us. And that is an important part about why we're here to hear about H.R. 3362. Secondly, H.R. 3811 requires the Secretary of Health and Human Services to alert any individual within 2 business days if their personal information in the exchanges is compromised. Recent reports from information security experts indicate that the security measures included in healthcare.gov and other exchange websites are not sufficient to prevent even modest attempts to infiltrate this government-run system. As a result of the website's hasty construction and ongoing systems integrations, we believe that the American public and those who have very sensitive personal information should be guaranteed their privacy. And we believe that this government should be held accountable at least to the standards that many federal agencies hold other private sector employers the same way, who many times they fine them excessive dollar amounts when they do not follow the same rules and regulations where customer data is exchanged or perhaps given out, even inadvertently, through breaks in their security system. This legislation simply requires an expedited and expedient notification of unauthorized access to personnel information and other personal information so that those affected would be advised and could take necessary steps to mitigate potential identity theft. Lastly, the committee will consider H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Obligations Deadline Act. This legislation provides the EPA with greater flexibility to determine whether their regulations authorized under the Solid Waste Disposal Act need to be reviewed. Currently, the EPA is reviewing and required to review these regulations every 3 years. In written testimony to the United States Congress, the EPA stated that such requirements, quote, pose a significant resource burden on the EPA. This legislation takes the steps necessary, which would be required to change the law to allow the EPA the flexibility, in this case, would put into law this giving them the authority to review these regulations appropriately. So that is why we are here today. We have two very distinguished members of the Energy and Commerce Committee. The first, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, and the second, the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Terry. I want to welcome both of you to the Rules Committee. If you'll please feel free to come on and up forward at the table and to take your place. I think each of you remember that you need to turn on your microphone, and as always, please try and speak clearly into that without objection. Anything you have in writing will be entered to the record. On behalf of Mrs. Slaughter and myself, we would welcome both of you to the committee. The gentleman from Nebraska is recognized.
Ask you a question. I'm testifying on both of the bills on behalf of the Energy and Commerce. Do you want me to just back to back, or just the first one, or the which one first?
I would go ahead and allow you to do both. We'll have a second panel, and I do not have you on that second panel, so for you to testify about both would be fine. Gentleman's recognized.
Very good. Then I'll testify first on my bill, 3811, the Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act. Is that the right one? Yeah. So on my bill, which is the transparency bill of the data collected by Health and Human Services, it's simple. It's bipartisan, and it just simply provides transparency collection of data that is under every state law mandated upon insurance companies to provide the insurance commissioners and governor's offices of each state. And so we're just simply taking what is already in existence in the federal law for transparency and data and putting it into this bill and for these exchanges. So as you mentioned during your opening statement, Mr. Chairman, what this bill does as a breakdown is that they will then notice or provide the information on a weekly basis of what unique website visits to healthcare.gov and what chat logins occurred, individuals who create an account and enroll in a qualified health plan, individuals who enroll in Medicaid, enroll in each zip code, the level of coverage they obtain, and the age of those enrollees, and the number of individuals who have effectuated or actually paid their first month's premium for the plan that they selected on the exchange. The latter of this has never been disclosed by Health and Human Services, even though this is data that would regularly be collected and actually have to be provided to state insurance commissioners. Additionally, the report also requests a detailed description of problems identified with the website functionality and actions that begin to resolve these problems. Now, everything being requested in this legislation is really fairly reasonable, common sense, sound requests. Section 1 of the report requests information that is critical for state insurance commissioners and governors. They've been asking for this type of information. State insurance commissioners, while not responsible for the functionality of the federal exchange, are still responsible for the financial soundness of insurance carriers who have sold policies to their constituents in that state. If population is signing up for a particular plan offering a certain region is disproportionately older or sicker, this could cause problems for that insurance carrier. This is especially true in the states where there is no real competition in the exchange because of a handful of plans signed up to participate to begin with. And we need to make sure that our state partners have a constant and accurate information that allows them to monitor how the risk is being spread amongst the states getting incomplete information or drips and drops from Health and Human Services is simply inexcusable. Section 2 and 3 of this report addresses the issue that we've all heard plenty about and the problems with the website since the day the Federal Exchange went live. It has been a problem for missed deadlines and broken promises. This is why Section 2 and 3 of the report requests status updates of what the problems are in encountering in the people are encountering in the federal facilitated exchange and what HHS is doing to fix them and who is supposedly to make sure the problem never happened. Lastly, this legislation requires that the Secretary disclose and keep up to date two more important pieces of information that's routinely required by state insurance commissioners of the insurance brokers in the state, and that's one, who is exactly working for the Federal Navigator grants, under the Federal Navigator grants in the states. Insurance commissioners and governors have every right to know who's working with consumers on health care plans. Number two, post on the Federal Exchange website the identities of agents and brokers who are certified and trained by the Federal Exchange to aid consumers in signing up the coverage. This gives someone who goes onto the exchange the option of knowing who has been certified or licensed by the exchange, who is a traditional insurance broker. So if they want someone with a little more experience, they can have that option, but that does not occur today. I'll go right into the next and then stay for the questions, if any. Joe Pitts' bill, 3811. The Health Exchange Security and Transparency Act of 2014 is sponsored by my friend, Congressman Joe Pitts, the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committees Committee on Health. The legislation is simple. It's short, basically one sentence long. It requires the Secretary of HHS to let someone know within 2 business days if a breach has occurred that resulted in personal identity information being stolen or accessed. Given what we as a committee and Congress have learned over the past 3 months in regards to the security of online federal exchange, swift action needs to be taken to ensure that citizens on the exchanges are protected. These people are forced by the law to buy insurance coverage through the exchanges, so they have no choice but to hand their personal information over. In my mind, they have a right to be alerted if the exchange is breached and their personal information is compromised so that they may take the necessary steps to safeguard themselves from fraud. We've heard from the contractors who testified before our committee from Secretary Sebelius that HHS did not perform a full security control assessment before the website went live. That a high-ranking CMS official said, quote, they have no confidence that personal information would be protected in the federal exchange. That a friendly hack or a white-hatted hack already occurred and someone successfully hacked into the exchange and alerted HHS. Secretary Sebelius and other HHS officials have said that the security protocols for the website are sufficient and that no breaches occurred. Well, we know 2 things. First, we heard the same unfounded confidence in August about the readiness of this website. And second, when it comes to being breached, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And frankly, we're just lucky that we've only had a white hat breach so far, to our knowledge. These days, you could be hard-pressed to find a major company with millions of records on file that is not subject to federal or state regulations regarding data breach notification. As a matter of fact, there are currently 47 state laws that regulate data breach notification. It seems reasonable that if there's been a breach, that we would want someone whose personal identity information, that we would notify them of that breach. Just common sense. We expect it from the business community. When you have this level of data, we should also have the same standard on us and the federal government. With that, I can conclude my remarks.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much. I'm delighted that you were here today, and welcome back. And it's my hope that the information that you bring us today can, in fact, be not just a bipartisan bill, but one that would be accepted by all members of Congress. Mr. Plum, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see the members of the committee.
I spent a few years of my life in beautiful New Jersey, and they were 3.5 beautiful years where I spent 3 Christmases, and I reflect fondly upon how much fun those snowstorms were. Did you get hit this last?
We had one. We had a very severe one, and
Very severe one.
the snow finally melted the last couple of days, but it was like a winter wonderland. That's for sure.
It does do that. Well, we're delighted you're back, and the gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say, first of all, I am happy, and I know it sounds cynical, but I'm not. I am happy to see that I'm not here today to see another Republican effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. And I understand that that the bills before us today are not of that nature, but I still think that they're not necessary, and that they basically impose a burden. A significant burden on the agencies, and the fact of the matter is that, we're trying to get as many people as possible signed up, even though we're after January 1st now. People can still sign up until March 31st, and I think I'd rather that the Secretary and those involved with these bills spent their time trying to get people to sign up and give them information about how to do that, as opposed to the burdens that I think these bills put on that are simply not necessary. I don't think they actually help Americans who want affordable health insurance. I could go on and talk to you about how successful it has been. I mean, I know that I think the last time we were here, we were talking about the fact that the website wasn't working well, but that is pretty much corrected now, and there are about 6 million people. Is it up to 9 now? I'm sorry. Okay, and the people on Medicaid. And of course, beginning January 1st, all the discriminatory practices that we've seen in the past, whether they mean lifetime or annual caps or pre-existing conditions, all these things are now outlawed. So I'm very happy with the Affordable Care Act, and I can report back from my time back in my district that people continue to sign up and are happy with the coverage and the affordability. I'm not going to take a lot of your time, Mr. Chairman. I would ask that my complete statement be put into the record. But if
Good. Without objection, we had previously announced that would be fine.
okay.
So thank you very much.
I just wanted to say a couple of things in part in response to what my colleague from Nebraska said. The first bill, I guess I'm going in the opposite order, by Chairman Pitts, the Exchange Security and Transparency Act, that requires a secretary to notify individuals if there is a security breach of their personal information. Now, first of all, there have been no successful hacks of healthcare.gov in the sense that someone purposely was trying to get personal information and was successful in doing that. Now, I know that no site, whether it's public or private, is 100% secure, but I think that the site is subject to very strict security standards and is constantly monitored and tested, and as you know, has been subject to more scrutiny, I think, than any other website in the history of the country, I think I can fair to say. So I just think that, again, this is the only, and I'm not saying this is your purpose, Mr. Terry, but I think the only concern I have is that, again, this is burdensome and not necessary, and some people, because they keep hearing about this possible security breach that hasn't happened, might be deterred from visiting the site. And again, I want people to go to the site. I don't want them to think that, they shouldn't go, or that they should be fearful that there's going to be some sort of security breach. Now, look, there's a number of things here that I think really don't make sense. For example, you're expecting the secretary to be responsible for state-based exchanges. I mean, how is she supposed to be responsible for security breaches of the state exchanges? I mean, as you know, many states have their own exchanges. I don't think the secretary should be responsible for the state-based exchanges. The other thing is, you mentioned, or I think, Mr. Terry, that I think it was you that this is the same type of thing that we do for the private sector, but the exchanges are being held to this notification requirement, but insurance companies and other private entities that actually have this private information, because the exchange doesn't hold any health information, but insurance companies do, and they're not expected to provide any notification. So again, it's not the case where this is a burden on the private sector that's now being extended to the public sector. It's a burden that's being put on the public sector that doesn't have the information, rather than putting it on the private sector that has the information. So again, I'm not saying that in theory it's that notification is a problem, but it is going to be a problem for the secretary, the way this is set forth. And actually, it should be the health insurance companies that have the burden, not the secretary that doesn't have the information on the website. The second bill is the Exchange Information Disclosure Act. That's Mr. Terry's bill. And again, I don't. Right now, the secretary has to monthly report almost all the information that's being asked for. Now, this bill says that this information has to be provided every week. Again, it's information that's really of little value and unnecessarily burdensome. It's already been provided once a month. Why do we have to provide it every week? You know, I understand what you're trying to do, but I think it's overly burdensome. I don't think it's necessary, and I would rather that we were spending and asking these departments to spend their time trying to get people to sign up and telling them what's available and what's affordable, instead of having to do all this paperwork and deal with notification of security breaches that really are not part of the system. I mean, the information is not there. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman. I'm not as unhappy as I have been in the past, because at least we're not trying to repeal the bill.
Well, humbug, those days are past us. Mr. Pallone, I want to thank you for being here, and obviously anything you have in writing we will accept into the record. Mr. Terry, I think people's personal information and data is important. And I had thought, until I heard Mr. Pallone's testimony before Congress today, that if there was a breach of security personal data information, that an insurance company had some responsibility to notify customers.
Well, those would follow the state laws, but this is focusing on the information gathered by the federal government through the exchanges. Mr. Pallone did mention that state exchanges, there may be a state exchange like California's, and maybe New Jersey has one, but the reality, neither does Nebraska. We went with the federal one. So for my state and New Jersey, my constituents can only go through the federal exchange, and they collect that data, and it's where that breach occurs. If it's at a state exchange, under the rules and regulations, the states have to tell HHS that there's a breach. And so they will already have that data to be able to release that and make sure that the people that have had their information taken or compromised or noticed, so they can take the reasonable precautions.
So in other words, I heard you say that the state of Nebraska would notify the federal government. Would they be under?
If they had their own exchange, like a California would do, they are obligated to notify Kathleen Sebelius, HHS, if there is a state exchange breach.
And anything further?
So it's not so difficult for HHS then to follow the protocols of a breach.
And that's what this legislation is about.
That's what Mr. Pitt's legislation does.
Seems reasonable to me. I spent a good bit of time in the private sector. If I took some of the testimony that we've got here, as long as you're doing everything the right way, working hard to do it, you shouldn't have to worry about if there's a perpetrator, if I listen to some of the testimony. And I disagree with that. I think that if you do take personal, private data and information, even if you're doing a good job of trying to get everything set up, if there's a breach, you ought to notify somebody. And I think that you should get credit for what you've done today, this hard work. So this is helping me to understand why, if, as the old saying goes, what's good for the goose is good for the gander.
Agree.
Personal data information. Thank you very much. Mrs. Fox.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you, and I appreciate our colleague bringing these bills to us today. I think the comments you've made are very appropriate, and I think this is common sense legislation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Slaughter.
I'm glad to see all of you. I really missed you, but I feel like we're taking up where we left off, and I get this crazy feeling I'm falling down the rabbit hole all the time. Let me see if I can work this out. A state exchange has to tell the federal government if there's a breach, but the federal exchange doesn't have to tell the federal government. Is that what you're saying? Does the federal government know if the federal exchange?
No, the breach notification goes to those who personal information has been compromised.
But you said the state has to go to Sebelius, right?
Well,
and then Sebelius.
Mr. Plone.
We don't need to go through all that. Let me tell you, if I've ever seen a perfect example of irony, it's here today. We got one rule covering 3 bills. 2 of them are closed, 1 will be open. One of them has to do with the fact that the EPA can't regulate anything. The agency that takes care of clean air and clean water and our health is trying to do something about all the children with asthma and everything else. Their regulations are no good. But on the other hand, when it comes to the Affordable Health Care Act, we want to know everything in the world about the navigators, including everything but their blood type. I don't think you mentioned blood type or their lineage back several generations. But everything else you want to know about, and the record should be kept on a daily basis. Is that right? And informed the public. Is that correct, Frank?
Well, first of all, that information is provided monthly. Now they want it
This
weekly.
is embarrassing.
The other thing, if I could ask you, understand that with this breach requirement, it's a two-day notification. So
Yeah.
the bill says that the secretary has to notify of a breach within 2 days. And then it has a standard that requires disclosure if the breach is known to have resulted in information being stolen or unlawfully
Well, let me ask you something. The
And it's just
information
very hard
the information would be important would not be held by the exchange, but would be with the insurance company, correct?
Exactly.
So whatever it is you're trying to do here, you're not going to get that information. I'm really embarrassed here.
I just don't see how you
we need to do the unemployment bill. We need to do 100 things here. And that we're taking time this afternoon with bills that probably have been around here forever. When did this bill, has there been any, I did see the letter from Henry Waxman to Chairman Shimkus saying that the DOJ and the other agency, defense was it, had serious reservations about one of these bills. And Chairman Shimkus had promised that before he would bring that bill to the Rules Committee, this letter was written Monday, I think, one Tuesday, that he would talk with him. That never took place.
No.
Now, you want to talk about a breach. If the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense announced they got a serious reservation about a piece of legislation, and the ranking member says, please don't take that thing to Rules till we get that straightened out, what in the world are we doing here today taking up this stuff? I mean, well, you have to be like Alice in Wonderland to believe 7 impossible things before breakfast to come up here and try to make some sense out of this. There is no sense here in what we're doing here today.
I mean,
so don't trouble your head with it and try to make any out of it.
I mean, if I could just ask, I mean, look, there's no regular order here. I mean, there's no regular order here. He says it's bipartisan, but there was no effort to work on this, you know, with the
Didn't Congressman Waxman state at the hearing, which I saw in that letter, that he really wanted to work together with this and to try to have some input from probably one of the most important members of Congress that we've got, Henry Waxman, particularly on issues that come before that committee. I don't know what in the world we're trying to prove here, but I'm going to tell you right now, the fact that we participate in it, LC, is getting a little hard to live with, isn't it? So I have no questions about it. What are you going to ask? What are we trying to do here? You're trying to stop the health care bill. And everybody knows that.
Well, I would.
I mean, we passed 60 bills in the last year or something like that, and 47 of them were voting on the health care bill. Please, people. Thank you.
Gentlewoman yields back. I'm sorry.
No, I just want, I don't know which bill you were talking about, but the 2 health bills, there was no regular order. I mean, I know he said that there was bipartisan, which I assume he means that he has a Democratic member on the bill. But in terms of working with the leadership in regular order, none of that is the case.
That's a shame.
We had a legislative hearing on this.
I mean, I don't know if he didn't have it on this particular bill.
One of those bills didn't have a markup. Which one was that? the security bill.
Right.
So here you are. I mean,
And again, I'm not suggesting that the idea in principle is bad, but, 2-day notice, unclear standard
Yeah.
as to when you notice, 1 week to gather the information instead of 1 month. I mean, how far do you have to go here?
I really want more than anything for us to get straightened out and work together and do something for this country, for heaven's sakes. I mean, I don't mean to be cranky about it here, but it really does, after a while, it's so transparent what's going on, and everybody knows it, and you see it all the time. Everybody knows that. So let's all grow up here and pull together. And I frankly think it's embarrassing tomorrow if we put this on the floor, but I suppose we will. It's probably a week's work.
Does the gentlewoman yield back her time? Gentlewoman yields back her time. Thank you very much. And let the record reflect both witnesses had a chance to defend themselves, and thank you very much. Gentleman from Oklahoma, the gentleman who had a very good Christmas.
I did.
Is recognized.
I did, courtesy of the people of Alabama. We appreciate it. Always good to see these two members here, two of my favorites. And since you brought up football, I have to say...
I brought up Christmas.
For Christmas. Just a little late. But I tell my friend from Nebraska, we want you back someday. I just happened to look at the bowl records, and between Nebraska and Oklahoma and the old Big Eight, they won or shared 100 football titles. And worth noting that that conference, which is now split between 4 conferences, Big 12, Big 10, SEC, and Pac-10, the old Big Eight won all of its bowl games except one, and that's because 2 Big Eight teams, Missouri and Oklahoma State, were playing one another. So, we know who the best conference is. We just don't exist anymore. But anyway, no offense to my friend from Georgia. I know it was a long day. But my friend from Nebraska has given my friends from Oklahoma plenty of long days, too.
Yeah, well, we enjoyed our game against Georgia.
Yeah, I thought you might. And but anyway, on to say, first of all, I want to thank both of you. And look, I understand, first, Mr. Pone, I want to tell you I appreciate your opening remarks. I really do. And just for the record, I want to note that, while we have tried to repeal this multiple times, 7 times those laws have actually been passed through the Senate and signed by the President. So there have actually been 7 substantive changes that a Republican House originated, a Democratic Senate, and the administration agreed to, and they've saved about $62 billion. And it's everything from getting rid of the 1099 forms, which we all figured out was a bad idea, to the assisted living program, which couldn't be financed. So there have been multiple efforts to change. And while you may disagree with the specifics on this bill, and we may be moving precipitously, I think that's a fair point to make. I think this is a serious issue and a serious effort to deal with it before we have a problem. The idea that we could have a breach of data and the federal government wouldn't be responsible for letting Americans know that had happened and doing it in a timely fashion, I actually think that will eventually become something we all find a way to agree on and work towards. So I actually think this is the first step in the right direction. May or may not get through the Senate, but I bet you the concept sooner or later comes into law, and I want to commend my friend from Nebraska and his colleagues for working on that and trying to do it, because I think it's a serious issue. It's one that I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about when it happens at the corporate level. I've had it happen to myself. A lot of Americans have. I'm certainly going to be very concerned about it, and I would expect whatever the government standard is, it'd be at least as high, if not higher, than the private sector, because it has more instruments, at its disposal to both protect itself and go after anybody that breaches security, and frankly has a higher level of responsibility, in my view, than a private entity does, particularly when it's requiring you to do something, offering a mechanism. It owes you protection then of your data, and I don't think the Secretary would dispute that. I think the other challenge from our side, just to get on the record here, is the idea that this law isn't changed all the time is just simply not the case. The administration changes it constantly with no notifications, no hearing, at the last moment, on Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. There's some new announcement every day about something being suspended, changed, or what have you. I mean, they've stretched way beyond. So I think they invite some of this legislative, counter, if you will. But I would just urge both of you, again, we'll have our different opinions on this bill. I like the bill. I appreciate the effort. Certainly look forward to supporting it. but I don't want the partisan dispute we have over the bill itself to get in the way of sooner or later coming around to some sort of legislative fix and set of requirements that we can agree on in a bipartisan way that would require the administration to notify Americans when and if a data breach continues. So, again, I commend the effort and look forward to working with both my colleagues going forward on this.
Virginia.
I'd care to have a response. That's fine. If not, I'll yield back my time. So, yield back.
The gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you very much,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Since my good friend from Oklahoma dared to go into the football business, I can't resist with four of us Floridians being on this panel. Even though I did not attend FSU, I did go to school in Tallahassee.
Would the gentleman yield for just one moment?
Of course I will.
I want to thank my friend, actually, and I was remiss in not doing that because, number one, that was a great football game. It was one of the best football games I've ever seen in my life. But number two, I want to congratulate you. I think our friends from Nebraska had something to do with this. I think our friends from Oklahoma. But to end the tyranny of the SEC is no small achievement and something that all of America on both sides of the aisle should take considerable pride in. So I congratulate
So
you.
you call winning every one of the bowl championship series except one in the SEC, you call that tyranny. I call it best football teams. That's what
Well, maybe, but not this year.
Anyway, and I might add, just as a personal peek with Coach Saban, I'm glad Oklahoma beat Alabama. That doesn't bother me none at all. But anyway, there are concerns that I have, and I'll share them with you, Mr. Terry. Medicare and CHIP, the Children's Health Insurance Program, require reporting, and it's done monthly. And this is the standard that is used in federal programs. Why is that not acceptable to you?
Well, we picked 7 days a week just from the standpoint of the volume of information coming through and the necessity to keep on top of that. And the fact of the matter is this data is being collected on a minute-by-minute basis anyway. Mm-hmm. And so whether it's 30 days or 7 days, the data is already sitting there. It's just an issue of whether or not they'll distribute the information or not. The other part of this is that what they've been doing is just releasing the number of people that are getting into the system and enrolling. And there are several other factors and breakdowns that are important to safety and soundness of insurance plans that insurance commissioners would want. We know that because we've talked to several insurance commissioners, especially the one from Nebraska. So there's other details than in just the one or two that are being released right now.
All right, then would you support weekly reports from Medicare and CHIP?
If they would like to.
No, I'm asking you. Would you?
But I don't. But you got to remember that the data here that's being collected through the exchanges is significantly different than Medicare and Medicaid because these are actual health plans, albeit directed by Health and Human Services through this exchange. And so the policies are being sold. There's not a Medicare policy other than a supplemental that's being sold. And yes, a supplemental still has to be reported, but Medicare enrollment does not.
All right. Do you envision that HHS will have to shift some resources? Or let me put this another way. When I first came to Congress, and for a long time, and I don't know why the discussion stopped, but all of the talk around here, or a lot of the talk, was about unfunded mandates. We hardly ever hear that term anymore. This, in some respect, would be a mandate to HHS. As one that's not technologically hip, the way you're putting it, yeah. Minute by minute, is there someone that could then just have that data at the end of the week and press the send
Absolutely.
button? and that's the way you envision it working. So there won't be any
Yeah.
need for a shift in
That
resources.
data is already being tallied. The issue is, when are you going to distribute it? When are you, in essence, going to push send to make it available?
All right. Well, I can't help
And
but agree with the ranking member. I really think this is a useless exercise. And when all is said and done, whether it's direct or masked, it seems to me that it's just a partisan effort to defund in some way or address the Affordable Care Act.
I'm
And
sorry you feel that
You all
way.
really do need to get over it. Not you, Lee. My friends, you're one of them, since you're in the
I
Republican
appreciate
Party.
that.
But it's the law now, and everything that you do about it ought to be about the business of trying to see, can we make the doggone thing work? It has its problems, as did all major legislation, but it isn't going to be changed no time soon. Certainly not for 2 years. What would make Obama sign anything that would impact or repeal this measure? I understand the need for efficiencies, and I would support them, but I wish that you would spend, not you, but my friends in the Republican Party, spend more time on trying to make this thing workable for all of America, rather than us bickering about whether or not it's going to remain the law. It's the law, like it or lump it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back his time. Appreciate the discussion. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the calls for working together to make things better. I support those calls. Candidly, I thought this was one of those occasions. It doesn't matter how many times folks say that this is legislation to repeal the President's health care bill. This will never be legislation to repeal the President's health care bill. Candidly, I've got a lot of constituents back home who wished that that was exactly what we're working on today, but we're not. We're working on security breaches today. We're not talking about repealing a line of the President's health care bill. We're talking about trying to make it work better, exactly as my friend from Florida has asked. And I suspect there are going to be a lot of Republican members who take some heat for this, Mr. Chair. I mean, for Pete's sakes, if we eliminated this government database altogether, we wouldn't have to worry about breaches. But we've created it from scratch, and it is at risk. And we do have this responsibility now, and instead of repealing it, we're talking about trying to work together to protect it. I don't know how in the world we begin to move forward if even trying to make the President's bill that I wholeheartly oppose harm people less becomes a controversial idea. I was on the phone, Mr. Pallone, with year-end issues with lots of financial institutions over the recess, and every single one of them, before I could get to talk to anyone, said, if you're calling about that Target data breach, I want you to know you don't have to do this, don't worry about canceling your card, don't be alarmed. So concerned were the American people about one data breach that every single financial institution I talked to, Discover, Visa, PNC, Wachovia, Wells Fargo now, across the board, led with that. I mean, this is not a pretend fear. This is not a Republican manufactured fear. This is an honest to goodness family worry at every single dinner table. And I take your point, Mr. Pallone. You say these reports are of very little value. I wasn't here when the Affordable Care Act passed. I would have voted no. I wouldn't have voted no simply because there was a once-a-month reporting requirement. I'd have voted no for a myriad of other reasons. But either these reports are a complete waste of time, and we shouldn't have had them to begin with, or they do provide some value, and providing that value even faster. Is it overkill? That's a case that one could make, but is it partisanship? Is it chicanery? Is it someone out there trying to create new problems? It just seems very unfair to the authors of this legislation, and again to bipartisan supporters of the legislation. I would say this is an effort to work on it together. And candidly, just being back 24 hours now, I'm discouraged that this is the same paintbrush that we were painting with all, and I say we collectively, same paintbrush we were painting with for all of last year. We're going to start painting with it again right off the bat. My friend from New York says it's so transparent what's going on here. We're trying to stop the health care bill. I would say to my friend, I am in fact trying to stop the health care bill, but not with these pieces of legislation before us today. They don't do a thing to stop the health care bill. And again,
Gentlemen, yield.
be happy to yield to my friend.
The fact is, Mr. Polonius pointed out, and it's absolutely true, that you're flogging the wrong horse. The information you're talking about is supposed to be held by the insurance companies, right? They should be reporting breaches. They're the ones who have that information, not the exchange.
I appreciate my friend bringing that up.
Why are you saying, one, that the exchange is going to be responsible, and the Secretary of HHS is going to be responsible for all of it, and has to tell us every 2 days?
I'm grateful to my friend for bringing that up, and I'd like to respond because that goes precisely to why we're here today. This is a brand new database crafted by the federal government, which, if someone can make the case, deserves the full faith and confidence of the United States citizenry for its computer programming skills. I don't think anyone's going to make that case here.
How about did you feel the same way about Target?
Reclaiming my time, I know the gentlelady would like to hear me answer her question. Brand new database that absolutely has information from the American people, information that did not exist on a government database, on this government database, 6 months ago. When I log on to this website, it's not going straight to Aetna. It's not going straight to Humana. It is transferring across these government systems, and we're saying, you know what? Since we, the government, did this to the American people, since this was our big idea, we are going to bear responsibility for making sure we do it right. Does United have an obligation to protect this data? Of course it does. And that's an obligation that's already in law. What we're saying is, whoever it is that thinks that a government takeover of health care is such a good idea, let's do it as responsibly as we possibly can. I don't understand why this is a point of contention. And Mr. Terry, maybe you know why it's a point of contention.
Well, I'm not going to get into that part of it. I have my reasons, just like I was accused of having mine. I think you're right. This is trying to improve something. This is trying to create transparency and notice, and that's something usually Frank is all in favor of. But I do want to say, in regard to clarifying what my friend Louise was mentioning, this is the data that is actually collected by the federal government. If there is a breach at Aetna or Blue Cross Blue Shield, then they have, under those states that they are doing business where the breach occurred, state obligations on breach notification, but there is none if it is the government's computer that is hacked. That's already been hacked at least once that we've been briefed on. Fortunately, it was a white hat hacker. But even the CMS Chief Information Security Officer said, and her name's Teresa Fryer, said there was, quote, no confidence that personal identifiable information will be protected in the federal exchange because of the lack of testing and front-end security put in. They've already admitted to, but they're repairing now. So when the breach occurs at a different level with a different entity, there are laws. Where there is no laws, where they are lacking is when it is at the federal exchange here.
And assuming that we're able to, absolutely, assuming that we're able to solve some of these issues, we will be able to restore some of that lost confidence out there. Again, I can't paint this with any other brush other than a step trying to help improve America's confidence in the system. Mr. Palone?
Well, I just want to go back to what Ms. Slaughter said. I mean, look, no one here, I think, is suggesting that. What's that? What I was trying to say is you made a very good point before, is that we don't have a problem per se with notification. We don't have a problem per se with providing information. But again, this wasn't done in a bipartisan effort with the Democratic leadership. I mean, if you really, look, I hope at some point when we're talking about the ACA, we can get to the point where, you know, in the Energy and Commerce Committee or wherever, but that's where Mr. Terry and I are, that if you have a problem, You can sit down with us on a bipartisan basis and go through the normal process and come up with a way of dealing with these issues. But that's not what happened here, and that's what you were trying to say before, Ms. Slaughter. I mean, in other words, look, you have a 2-day notification with a standard as to when you notify, which I think, just from a common sense point of view, reading it is not doable, okay? If you had time over the next few weeks to sit down and say, I think HIPAA has a 60-day notification, all right? Now you went from 60 to 2 days. It's not possible to do in 2 days, and the standard as to what a breach is, the way it's written, in my opinion, is not practically, it can't be done. So, and the same thing with the information. I mean, we are providing information on enrollment on a monthly basis. You want more information? Okay, let's sit down and see if a week is feasible. I'm hearing from the department that this 2-day notice with the what I call a standard that's not is not practical, and the 1 week is just overly burdensome and really not going to provide you with anything that's meaningful. We haven't had a chance to sit down with I haven't had a chance to sit down with Mr. Pitts and talk about this. This is the second day we've been back here, and all of a sudden we have this bill before your committee. I just think that if you want to be reasonable and rational, this isn't the way to do it. I'm not sitting here telling you that you're trying to repeal the bill. I don't think you are. But you're just creating all these burdens at a time when we're trying to get people affordable health insurance. Why don't we sit down and plan this out rather than just bringing it up without any opportunity for the Democratic leadership to look at it?
I take the gentleman's point, and I wish that we did work in an environment that lent itself to that. I support what you're saying. It's, again, very difficult when even I would tell you what we're trying to do here at a time when everybody's trying to get signed up is boost the American people's confidence that it's okay to get signed up. And again, there's not a man or woman here that would argue that we don't have a confidence deficit out there that is hurting the sign-ups. But it is made all the harder when every effort to do that is met with you guys are just out there to destroy the president's health care bill. There can't possibly be any merit to your ideas. I think we both have a long way to go to find that middle ground. I share your hope that we'll find it, but I'm glad we're doing something today to try to build confidence in that system. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized. By the way, it's good seeing you and your son yesterday.
Thank you. It was good.
I hope he had a good time.
He was. He had.
I noticed he was having a great time on the Republican side.
He was running all over. Absolutely.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. The gentleman from Georgia mentioned that this bill is about security breaches. And while that may be an issue to address in health care reform, there is currently a much bigger issue in this country around security breaches, namely forgery and theft of Social Security numbers. Over 11 million people that are here illegally, one of the big drivers of identity theft, false IDs, stealing the IDs of Americans. We only have E-Verify for under approximately 10% of workers. That's to see if they're here legally, even know who they are. This bill doesn't address any of these much larger concerns about security breaches that can be addressed in immigration reform. We have a bill, H.R. 15, that does address that. If there's other ideas that our colleagues on the other side have, we encourage them to move forward. But, I mean, this is again, there may be an issue here we're getting at. It may need a solution. But there is wholesale identity theft occurring in this country. And yet, week after week, we seem to be here in this committee talking about a wide-ranging set of topics, ranging from asbestos to drilling to a bill that affects a small segment of potential breaches in healthcare, and yet we still haven't done a thing, passed a single bill into law to address our broken immigration system. So I just hope that, again, while certainly we appreciate any effort to try to figure out how to reduce any breaches here, it's kind of missing the forest through the trees. There's 11 million people here. We have no idea who they are, where they are, if they're working. They don't check whether they're working. Some of them are using stolen IDs. People are buying, selling Social Security numbers. Let's address that if we are truly concerned about our private information, identity theft, and breach of security. That's what we need to address. And I hope that, Mr. Chair, we can bring a bill that addresses that side of it before this committee so that we don't miss the forest just by focusing on a tree. And I'll yield back to the chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. As the gentleman knows, this discussion that I have encouraged the gentleman to continue having in this committee and any time that he sees me is well respected and understandable, and I appreciate the gentleman, and he knows that. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the folks that are sitting there at the table trying to answer questions and obviously give your opinion as to why we should do what we are doing or not do what we are trying to do. But I will tell you this, that there's a huge difference between what occurred at Target, where they had the PIN numbers and account numbers, and it's easy, you know, I've had my credit card compromised, and the credit card companies indemnify you. They take care of you. They typically, if you can, you know, Home Depot charge or whatever it is, they'll indemnify you on that. But what we're talking about here is personal information that can be compromised. And once the personal information of law-abiding citizens that are here legally is put into the government database, which they have no control over because they have to do it by law or be penalized. The information that goes into the federal government exchange, what happens to that information? If I enter in all the data that's required, what happens to that information within the federal exchange? Where is that kept? Mr. Terry?
Yeah, it is collected, all of that data is collected in a central hub. And where is it located? In Charlotte? Where is that? We're not sure. But it's held still on government property, on government servers.
And we've had, at least from HHS and others, that have said that they weren't able to do the security, I guess, the checks on the system to make sure that the data is secure. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, Kathleen Sebelius even testified to that fact that they didn't have the time to do the end-to-end security testing.
And I don't think what we're doing at this point is criticizing that, but here's where I come from. 38 years in law enforcement, I will tell you this, that once your personal data is stolen, your identity is compromised, they have the ability to do so many different things, i.e., everything from get a car loan in your name to get a credit card to do all types of other nefarious activities that I investigate over 38 years to try to restore your credit and try to get your identity back, I will tell you, is no small task. And I would think that anything the federal government, since we mandate the collection of this data, the federal government then should be in a position, once you know there's a breach, I mean, you don't know if there's not a breach, but once you know there's a breach and data's been compromised, that you reach out so those folks that have been compromised can get a hold of Experian or any of the other credit agencies and start doing the due diligence that they need to do to protect themselves. I don't think that's an unreasonable expectation that the federal government should meet. Now, whether the reporting requirements on, you know, a weekly report, we're also talking about data that's captured in a computer system that typically is, if you can capture the data, you can report on the data and spit that back out. I mean, I received those types of information when I was sheriff, when we collected data. So it's not like you're going to sit there with, you know, a visor on and sit there with a pencil and start going through line by line. It's a matter of writing code to collect the data to report back. Whether that's necessary or overkill, like some of my colleagues have said, I don't know. But I will tell you this, as it relates to protecting personal information that can be compromised, I think it is an obligation that we should not shirk from. Because you get one chance to do that. And once we know about it, we Mr. Pallone, if your identity is stolen, I am telling you today that you're going to go through a nightmare to try to correct it. And we're collecting, and we're talking about, what, 9 million people now have signed up, a lot of them on state exchanges, but I don't know if it's 1 million on the federal exchange, I'm not sure, but that's a lot of folks' identity.
I'm not arguing with your point, and I'm not trying to. I'm simply saying that from a practical point of view here, we haven't really had the security breach. Now you're putting this burden on, which I just don't think is reasonable.
Well, I can't hear you.
In other words, how are we going? I'm not arguing that to try to tell you that you're concerned that there should be some way to address it. I'm just simply saying that this bill, the way it's written, it's, we haven't had the security breach. Now all of a sudden you're saying there's got to be a 2-day notice, right? I mean, it's a very hard burden, 2 days. Like I said, for HIPAA, it's 60 days, I believe. And then you have a standard which is not really clear about when a breach has occurred. If you read the language, I mean, I can read it to you again if you like. I read it before. And you're doing all this, making all this obligation on the Secretary, including for the state exchange, which they don't have control over, for a security breach that hasn't occurred. So, I mean, we can always say that we need to do more, we have to be better. But, we're trying to get people signed up here, and and we haven't had an opportunity to air this and talk about a better way to do it.
Well, Mr. Plone, reclaiming my time, I would agree with you that what you don't want to do is scare people off, and I think this is the intent. Maybe Mr. Terry wants to go on to that point somewhat, but, if I feel comfortable that my data that I input into this government system is going to be secure, then there is no reason for me not to do it.
Right. I mean, you also understand they're not providing, because pre-existing conditions have been abolished, they're not providing health information. They are providing their name, address, or social security number. They're not providing health information.
Mr. Terry?
Yes. I just thought I wanted to put in context, because I think I know what my friend from New Jersey is trying to say when he says HIPAA in 60 days is, okay, they have a... But Catherine Sebelius testified in front of us that HIPAA does not apply to this. And so there is no standard, whether it's 2 days or 60 days. They don't have to notify anybody of a breach.
None. Nothing.
I just want to make sure we are clear on that.
Well, again, I don't want to keep repeating, but the 60-day notice under HIPAA does apply. I mean, you're establishing an additional... I mean, the same standard applies for HIPAA that applies here. She said that, what you said, that, she couldn't certify to the, whatever the language was.
Well, absolutely said HIPAA does not apply.
It's an OMB directive, but it's the same, the 60 days.
Well, I think there is a difference. So when legislatively people are required to do a certain action, and the action is to provide personal data, your personal data, in regards to signing up for the exchange, through the federal exchange, I think federal government has an obligation to notify people once it comes to their attention. I mean, if they don't know about it, you can't notify anybody because I don't know that anything happened. But once I notice that...
You have that obligation, though, for this.
Well, there is. Yeah, but let me explain something to you this, is that if your information is breached in 60 days, I will have ruined you in a lot of different ways, financially and otherwise. 60 days is a lifetime if I know that the data has been breached.
I'm not suggesting that it should be 60 days. I'm simply saying that we're now down to 2.
I think what you're saying, though, is that HIPAA is 60 days, so whatever.
I'm saying there is an obligation. If you want to reduce it, we should talk about it. But 2 days, that's going to be very difficult, and I don't know where the 2 days came from, to be honest. I mean, it certainly didn't come from any committee action or,
Well, I appreciate your comments. And Mr. Terry, did you want to add anything?
To add a little bit of flavor to this detailed debate, HHS in contracts with their contractors requires 1 hour notice from them of any breach.
sounds like we should have done a better job of pinning them back, but 2 days, I think, is reasonable, and I certainly do appreciate
would my
you
colleague
moving
from
forward.
Florida-
Absolutely, as long as you're talking about FSU, we're good.
Oh, happy to do that. But I just, sitting here and then reviewing the legislation, I asked you to yield so that I could ask Mr. Terry a question. What happens if they don't report? And the reason that I raise that is having served on several committees here in Congress where we say to the bureaucracy, report, and then the bureaucracy doesn't report. And I'll tell you who is really masterful at that would be the Pentagon. Many times we tell them 30 days we need this information from the Intel Committee. That's a group that is really, they didn't pay no attention to none of the things that we said. So does your legislation call for something to happen if there is no report?
No, there is no penalty to HHS written in here.
Right. That's what they're going to do.
But I will tell you, if they are not providing the data, you will have state insurance commissioners that will be objecting. You will probably see it on the nightly news. Yeah. And, I mean, there's other ways to force them to go through with it. Are you suggesting that HHS would just break the law?
No, I'm telling you that bureaucrats all the time don't follow what legislators require of them.
And reclaiming my time, I happen to agree with Mr. Hastings on that point, is that you see this all the time, that we make a standard that somebody's supposed to do as relates to the federal government, and then you say, okay, what's the penalty? And there's never a penalty. So I would agree with you on that, but I would hope that HHS would follow the law. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back his time. Thank you very much. Gentleman from Orlando, Florida is recognized. Gentleman has no question. Gentleman from Louisville, Texas, Dr. Burge is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our witnesses for being here today. I apologize for being a little bit late. Did we discuss the OMB circular that governs this concept for federal agencies?
You were saying about the OMB directive for 60 days?
Well, the OMB actually is from 2007. Under timeliness of notification, agencies should provide notification without unreasonable delay following the discovery of a breach consistent with the needs of law enforcement, national security. Decisions to delay notification should be made by the agency head. So it's fairly vague, the standard under which federal agencies, individuals in the private sector, of course, are governed by a compendium of state laws, and the timeline may vary, but this is pretty vague as far as the notion of the time for notification. Now, if I have a charge account with Target, that's voluntary. No one forced me to have it. Under Obamacare, I got to get it. So I had to go on the website. I had to provide my information. I got no problem at all if we want to be a little bit more proscriptive in this event, because this is some of the most proscriptive law that that anyone in this committee has ever seen. So I'm okay with what you're doing, Mr. Terry. I think 2 days is generous. Certainly, there is no standard under which they now have to report, and I think we need to fix that. The statement that there have been no breaches, actually, you heard the testimony of Mr. Chow in our committee. He said, well, not many. Not many is not zero. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. I want to thank both of you for taking. Is there any other member that seeks time?
Mr. Chairman, I just ask unanimous consent to insert in the record the statement of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee on this subject.
Thank you very much. I have not heard any member, and perhaps it's because it's not available. Have we heard anything from the administration about the position that they take on this important matter? We have not heard anything from the administration.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized.
I just want to associate myself with the remarks from Mr. Polis, and even though I wasn't here, with the remarks from Mr. Hastings and Ms. Slaughter, and also just point out, kind of to reemphasize a point Mr. Pallone made. Look, I'm the first one to say that this Affordable Care Act is not perfect, and there needs to be some changes and some tweaks, but there's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. And we all know what the right way to do it is, and this is not the way we should be doing it. And rather than take up more time, this is a new year, and I've resolved to do what I can to help make these Rules Committee meetings shorter. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back his time. Is there another member that seeks time at this juncture? There is not. I want to thank both of the members of Congress, senior members of the Energy and Commerce Committee, who represent your parties very well with the ideas and the factual basis that of the work that takes place in your committee. And I want to thank both of you for your time. Mr. Pallone, it's good to see you. Ms. Terry, thank you very much. And you're now excused.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Our second panel will now be prepared to present themselves. I want to thank them for their time as they've been waiting. Mr. Tonko, welcome. I'm delighted that you're here. I know that you've been here for a long period of time. If you'll please feel free to come and join us at the head table. We're also joined by the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson. Both of you recognize you're here for the Rules Committee for important legislation and testimony today. Excuse me, as always, anything you have in writing will be entered into the record, and we're delighted that you're here on testimony, excuse me, H.R. 2279, a Reduced and Excessive Deadline Obligations Act 2013. Gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Johnson's recognized. Welcome, Bill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Sessions, members of the committee. I'm pleased to appear in support of the amendment to H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Deadline Obligations Act of 2013, which also includes my legislation, H.R. 2226, the Federal and State Partnership for Environment Protection Act, and Mr. Latta's bill, H.R. 2318, the Federal Facility Accountability Act of 2013. Our goal with all three of these bills is to modernize some of the environmental laws that we oversee and make sure that the states are playing a significant role in implementing them. To do that, we began this Congress with a hearing on the role of the states in protecting the environment. State environmental protection officials shared their experience and expertise with us and helped us better understand the complex partnership between the states and the federal government as states implement federal laws, such as the Solid Waste Disposal Act, and the EPA implements the Comprehensive Response Compensation and Liability Act, CERCLA, or the Superfund law, and the relation to state environmental protection laws. Today we consider three bills that are a logical outgrowth of that discussion. The Reducing Excessive Deadline Obligations, or REDO Act of 2013, would give the EPA flexibility by correcting two arbitrary action deadlines that were written into the Solid Waste Disposal Act and CERCLA many years ago. RCRA contains a mandate that EPA review and, if necessary, revise all RCRA regulations every 3 years. This deadline is unnecessary and unworkable in the face of the significant number of regulations that currently exist under RCRA. The bill would allow the administrator to review and, if necessary, revise regulations as she thinks appropriate. The bill would also lift an action deadline in CERCLA requiring the EPA to identify, prior to 1984, classes of facilities for which to develop financial assurance regulations. More than 30 years passed without action from the EPA to promulgate regulations regarding financial assurance. A lawsuit and a court order finally prompted the EPA action just a few years ago. In the meantime, the states and other federal agencies have long since acted, putting in place strong financial assurance requirements of their own. That's why this bill also provides that if the EPA does get around to establishing federal financial assurance regulations, the state's requirements would not be preempted. The bill also requires the EPA to gather information regarding the financial assurance programs of states and other federal agencies and report to Congress regarding whether there is a need for additional regulation by the EPA. Should EPA determine there is a need for additional requirements, the bill ensures that compliance with the existing state or other federal requirements will count towards compliance with the EPA's requirements. The Federal Facility Accountability Act would bring the CERCLA waiver of sovereign immunity into conformity with the Solid Waste Disposal Act and, for that matter, the Clean Air Act by requiring that all federal Superfund sites comply with the same state laws and regulations as a private entity. This is not a new concept. Legislation has been introduced previously by my friends across the aisle to ensure that federal agencies comply with all federal and state environmental laws, including CERCLA. In fact, the Federal Facilities Compliance Act of 1991 had the same goal, to make federal facilities subject to all the same substantive and procedural requirements, including enforcement requirements and sanctions that state and local governments and private companies meet. The Federal Facility Accountability Act applies this same policy to federal facilities under CERCLA that already applies to federal facilities under the Solid Waste Disposal Act. Some argue that if this bill becomes law, it will change federal agencies' spending by forcing them to comply with state laws, and that CERCLA is different because it is retroactive and applies to prior actions of the federal government. But the Solid Waste Disposal Act often applies to past conduct. That's why there is a provision for corrective measures. In fact, EPA has issued multiple guidance documents that describe how federal agencies should harmonize RCRA and CERCLA with respect to cleanups of hazardous waste. Past conduct, future conduct, the fairness principle is the same. The basic question is whether federal agencies should comply with state environmental protection laws just as private companies and state and local agencies must do. My bill, the Federal and State Partnership for Environment Protection Act, does exactly what the rule implies and would go a long way toward making the state partners with the EPA in cleaning up hazardous waste sites. CERCLA is implemented by the EPA, but often states are in the best position to understand the sites in their state. This bill would allow states to play a larger role in the CERCLA process in several ways. The bill would allow states to list a site that it believes needs to be on the national priorities list every 5 years and would provide transparency to the states if they suggest a site for listing. The bill would also allow states to be consulted before the EPA selects a remedial action. The states are on the front lines and understand at the ground level how to prioritize environmental actions within their states. They often come up with innovative solutions that better fit the local problem. We heard examples of that in our hearing on the role of the states in protecting the environment. CERCLA is a key example of a statute passed more than 30 years ago that we can now update and strengthen the federal-state partnership to get sites cleaned up. Removing barriers to job creation imposed by the federal government is a cornerstone in our governing philosophy. Corey Gardner, Bob Ladd, and I produced bills to ensure that the federal government reduces the red tape barriers to job creation while still keeping our environment healthy. These important bills aim to improve the federal and state relationship when dealing with hazardous waste. Mr. Chairman, I thank the committee for its time, and with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Mr. Johnson, thank you very much. And as always, when I see you, I try and remind you of our thanks to you for the service to the United States military for your career, and thank you very much.
Honored to have served, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Tucker, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Chair Sessions and Ranking Member Slaughter and all members of the committee. I'm here today to testify on H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Deadline Obligations Act of 2013, and to ask the committee to grant an open rule for its consideration. If an open rule is not granted, then I would request that the committee grant floor consideration to the amendments filed by Democratic members earlier today. H.R. 2279 is a deeply flawed bill that, if enacted into law, would scuttle long overdue actions by the Environmental Protection Agency, increase the public cost for cleaning contaminated sites, and likely slow down the pace of those cleanups. It took many years of oversight by Congress, the work of many administrations of both parties, and a great deal of litigation to get the Superfund program on track. Contaminated properties are a terrible liability, not only for the property owner, but for the entire surrounding community. They expose the public to toxic substances, drag down property values, and are a blight on the landscape. Getting those areas cleaned up and returned to productive use offers opportunity for job creation, economic revitalization, and restoration of a lost part of our tax base. The Superfund law is not perfect, and it is likely we could identify improvements to consider. But the committee has done too little recent oversight work to develop these options. Instead, this bill offers more problems than solutions. Let me give you one concrete example of where this bill goes astray. In 1980, Congress directed the United States EPA to require businesses handling hazardous substances to demonstrate their ability to pay for potential environmental cleanups. These requirements are known as financial responsibility requirements. Congress had a simple goal: to reduce taxpayer liability. If businesses that were prone to create Superfund sites obtained insurance or posted bonds in amounts necessary to cover the cost of cleaning up contamination resulting from their operations, then the taxpayer would not be on the hook for expensive cleanups. These requirements make sense, especially because the Superfund program has been slashed 40% since fiscal year 2009. In this budget situation, the taxpayer cannot afford to pick up the tab for private industry. Businesses must be held responsible. But this bill takes us in the wrong direction. It builds new barriers to financial responsibility requirements. The bill proceeds from a false assumption that the states are already requiring adequate financial responsibility requirements and blocks EPA from instituting adequate requirements if a state has any requirement, even if it is inadequate. I think we should all be concerned that this approach is likely to result in polluters not being held responsible for their pollution, and taxpayers being on the hook for tremendous cleanup costs. Any bill that we pass to amend Superfund should move us forward. It should speed cleanups and make them more effective and certainly less costly. Considering the long history of the Superfund program, the complexity of the law, and the importance of this program to the general public, the committee should have devoted far more time to the development of legislation that amends the underlying law. Instead, this bill was rushed through the committee with little consideration of its implications for cleanups or its budgetary impacts. I submitted an amendment for the committee's consideration to broadly deal with this problem. My amendment would block any provisions of this legislation from taking effect if it would determine impact, if it would detrimentally, impact our ability to clean up contaminated sites. My colleagues have submitted equally constructive amendments that are worthy of consideration by all members of the House. Again, I ask that all members of the House have an opportunity to offer amendments to H.R. 2279. An open rule would be the best way to ensure that that happen. If an open rule is not granted, I respectfully request that amendments submitted to the Rules Committee earlier today be made in order. With that, I thank you for your attention and consideration and yield back the remainder of my time.
Mr. Tonko, thank you very much. I appreciate both of you being here today. The gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I thank our colleagues for being here today. I have no questions. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back to time. Gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Thank you. And gentlemen, I appreciate your being here today, too, and for your work. And I would like to ask unanimous consent to produce or to put into the record the Statement of Administration Policy.
Without objection.
This only applies to H.R. 2279, reducing excessive deadline obligations. They strongly oppose it. That would make a number of problematic changes in the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation Liability Act, as Mr. Tonko had just pointed out, which could delay remediation of national priority cleanup projects with the most urgent human health and safety risks. The existing federal-state partnership provisions have been a cornerstone in developing strategies to address the releases of hazardous substances and to remediate the contaminated sites across the country. It goes on at some length, but the pertinent clause is for the reasons stated above. The President's senior advisors would recommend that he veto this bill. And I have no questions. Thank you both.
Gentlewoman yields back her time. Gentleman from Utah is recognized. Gentleman does not seek time. The gentleman from Massachusetts does not. Is there any member of the committee on the Democratic side that seeks time? Seeing none, is there any member on the Republican side that seeks time? Seeing no time, I want to thank both of you not only for your testimony, but really for your hour and a half or so that you have spent, you and your staff time. We at the committee recognize that both of you come prepared as you have because of staff time. Staff members who are engaged in not only attempting to do the research, but do the necessary obligations to make sure you're well-staffed, and I think they have both done that. If you please make sure that you'll leave anything that you have in writing for us, and both of you are excused. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This now closes the hearing portion of H.R. 3362 and also H.R. 3811, hearing H.R. 2279. All distributed. Chair will now be interested in a motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, I move the committee grant H.R. 2279, the Reducing Excessive Deadline Obligations Act of 2013, a structured rule. The rule provides 1 hour general debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule makes an order as original text for the purpose of amendment, an amendment in the nature of a substitute consisting of the text of Rules Committee Print 113-30 and provides that it shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against that amendment in the nature of a substitute. The rule makes an order only those further amendments to H.R. 2279 printed in Part A of the Rules Committee report. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question. The rule waives all points of order against the amendments printed in Part A of the report. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 2 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 3362, the Exchange Information Disclosure Act. Under a closed rule, the rule provides 1 hour debate with 40 minutes equally divided, controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce, and 20 minutes equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Ways and Means. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the amendment to H.R. 3362, printed in Part B of the Rules Committee report, shall be considered as adopted, and the bill as amendment shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions in the bill as amended. The rule provides one motion to recommit with or without instructions. Section 3 of the rule provides for consideration of H.R. 3811, the Health Exchange Security Transparency Act of 2014, under a closed rule. The rule provides 1 hour debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce. The rule waives all points of order against consideration of the bill. The rule provides that the bill shall be considered as read. The rule waives all points of order against provisions of the bill. Finally, the rule provides one motion to recommit.
The committee has now heard the motion by the gentleman from North Carolina, and I defer to the gentleman from Louisville, Texas, for an explanation of the rule. The gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. The rule provides for consideration of H.R. 2279, the CERCLA package, under a structured rule. It makes an order two amendments, both offered by the Democrats. The other amendments submitted to the committee were not germane. The rule also provides for consideration of H.R. 3811, the Exchange Data Security Bill, and H.R. 3362, addressing the Affordable Care Act enrollment numbers, both under closed rules. With respect to H.R. 3362, the rule self-executes the Terry Amendment, which makes a number of technical changes. Lastly, the minority will have the opportunity to offer a motion to recommit on all three bills. It's a fair rule, and I urge its support. I yield back.
You've now heard the discussion, the motion from the gentleman from Texas and also the gentlewoman, her motion from North Carolina. Is there any amendment or discussion?
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlewoman's recognized.
I have an amendment to the rule. I move the committee grant H.R. 3362, H.R. 3811, and H.R. 2279 as open rules so that all members have the opportunity to offer their amendments on the floor, and I'd like to speak on it very briefly. Mr. Chairman, looks like the session's picking up where the last one left off with more closed rules. And if we're so concerned about the security of the healthcare.gov, it's a pity that we did not reach across the aisle and work with the Democrats. The ranking member, Waxman, is a champion of security issues, and neither he nor any other Democrats were consulted. This bill has come to us without any markups or prior consideration. And the Superfund bill is removing practical safeguards in the guise of lessening government bureaucracy, while the health care disclosure bill is piling on unnecessary added bureaucracy. I think that can only be defined as sending mixed signals. This is a disgrace to the democratic process. All three of these bills should be granted open rules so that the House can work its will and all its voices can be heard.
The gentlewoman has now made has an amendment at the desk and has spoken about her ideas about that. As further discussion.
Mr. Chairman?
Gentleman's recognized.
Yeah. I take the gentlelady's point. It's actually 3 years ago today that the freshman orientation would have been going on in Williamsburg that many of us were a part of, and I think everyone gets frustrated that whether it's calendar or whether it's policy or whatever it is, we don't end up with a more open process more often. I could not be more thrilled that we're talking about a rule that has 3 separate bills in it, and this is a rule that makes every single germane amendment that's not an earmark in order. And I think this is exactly the right foot to get started on for 2014. It's not easy to make everybody's ideas in order all the time, but that's what the gentlelady from North Carolina has read for us today. I'm grateful that is the foot we're starting on, and I thank the chairman and yield back.
Would the gentleman yield? Do I understand that you think that a single rule containing 3 rules, 2 closed and 1 structured, is the proper way to do our business here? Is that what you're saying?
I would say to the gentlelady that any time we can make every single germane amendment that members have submitted in order, I think that's a good day for us. That's a good day.
Were there germane amendments to the other 2 bills that are closed? They were not even considered for amendments.
Every amendment, I'd be happy for someone to correct my impression, take me down from my excitement here on day 1, but that's my understanding.
We have 2 amendments that were made in order on 2270, whatever.
Would the lady yield to me for one?
Well, if I could finish this for just a minute, Jim, if you don't mind. In the 113th Congress, the Republican waivers were 73 out of 76, Republican amendment waivers 9, germane waivers 1, 3-day waivers for legislation only 13, and 3-day waivers including approach printing 19. Rule types open 5, modified open 1, structured 33, closed 44. That's not a great record given that there are representatives from 2 different points of view in the Congress of the United States. Pretty much shuts one of us out completely. And we continue to call in for open rules simply to give us the opportunity to make amendments so that we can speak for the nearly half of the people who live in the United States. Actually, and given the fact that in the last election we got 1 million more votes than you guys did.
Reclaiming my time.
To let those people be heard from as well.
Having toiled on this committee as a staffer, I'm familiar with what a truly closed process looks like.
This is it.
This is it was Thomas Jefferson who said liberty is gained by inches. It just boggles my mind. We have an opportunity to come together on a rule that has made every submitted amendment that's remain in order, and we're using this as a point of division as opposed to a point of opportunity to start the new year. I don't dispute what the gentlelady has said. What I dispute is that it's whether or not we're going to call accepting every germane amendment a success, or we're going to call it a failure. I'm just thrilled. I'm not going to be unthrilled. I will not let the gentlelady take away my excitement about the way 2014 is starting.
We need to remember that the process for the Rules Committee does not begin here. It begins in committees. One of these bills never saw a committee. We came up 2 days ago. You are changing all the rules of the House and following strange instructions, whatever you want to do, and shutting it all down, completely closing us out. But what you hope we can do here is all of us to get together on what was already a bad process. You heard that Mr. Waxman had an agreement with Chairman Shimkus that he would talk to the Department of Defense and Department of Justice, and failed to do so, and asked that the bill be put off, and you couldn't even consider that. We may come together up here, but it's just as bad as the process that goes on in the committees. Again, or the lack of committee work on it, and to simply send it up here and expect us to swallow it. Let me yield to Mr. McGovern.
Well, I just, for a point of clarification, if I'm understanding it, I mean, first of all, the gentleman gets thrilled very easily, obviously. But
I will take that as a compliment, not a criticism.
Right. But secondly, if I just want to clarify the process, there are two of these bills. In my understanding, there was not even a process set up for amendments to be offered. And so, I would just say to the gentleman before he gets too excited that even kind of goes beyond, it kind of refutes his idea that somehow all germane amendments were made in order. You had two bills where there was an amendment process that wasn't even set up, so members didn't even have an opportunity to offer an amendment. So this process is deeply flawed. It is what it is. We get it. But, I mean, to try to say that this is somehow some kind of a great process or open process or we all should be proud of it, people should not be proud of this. And I just add one other thing. I don't know why you don't want to have open rules on these things, because you're doing nothing else. We're not dealing with immigration. We're not dealing with jobs. We're not dealing with an infrastructure bill. And if I'm
one house bill,
right, and if I'm reading roll call and the Hill and Politico correctly, the Speaker and the Majority Leader's intent is to keep us here as few days as possible. So, I mean, stay a few extra days and open up the process. I don't think that would make us all thrilled. So I yield back my time.
Will the gentleman who controls the time?
Just a moment, please.
Okay.
The gentleman from Georgia controls the time. The gentleman is recognized.
I'd be happy to yield to my friend from Colorado.
Thank you. Now I would add to the litany of issues that are not being addressed in this legislation, ones that often are championed by people on your side of the aisle. This bill does not reduce our corporate tax rate. This bill does not provide a way to repatriate assets from overseas back into this country to invest in American jobs. There's a lot of things this bill doesn't do. And this bill doesn't address the larger concerns around security breaches. So when we say, we're allowing amendments that are germane, it's important to also explain to people that we cannot fix the immigration system in this bill. That is not germane. So that amendment, I didn't even bother offering it because I knew it wasn't germane. So there's a lot of things when you say that it's germane, it's constructed in such a way that we can't even address, even within the concept of security breaches. We can't even touch the fact that there's millions of Social Security numbers of Americans being stolen by people that are here illegally. We can't even go there in this bill because that would not be germane. So it's a very limited amount of amendments that can be included. So a more open process would hopefully allow amendments that would actually address the bigger issue around security breaches to be addressed through an amendment. I'll be happy to yield back.
I appreciate my friend's comments because I agree with almost everything he had to say. And just as a reminder, if we had an open rule, those non-germane amendments that you'd like to offer would still not be available to be offered on the House floor. Germaneness is not just a rule here in the Rules Committee; it's a rule on the House floor as well. What is most valuable to me as a relatively new member are the small targeted bills that deal with small target issues, really allow for a more open open process, and I hope we'll be able to find those opportunities to do that. There's no question that we can always find something that we don't like. If one wants to vote no on every bill, there's always a good reason to do that. There's been so much talk about trying to find that common ground, trying to come together. Again, we could have started out the year with a completely closed rule. We started out the year with a rule that's made everybody's amendment in order that they submitted. I call that a step in the right direction, Mr. Chairman. I hope we can do more of that as we go forward, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back his time. We're now discussing slaughter amendment. Is there further discussion? Gentleman's recognized.
I want to just clarify the record. If I'm understanding this correctly, there are two bills that we're dealing with here today where there wasn't even an amendment process set up for members to even offer amendments.
In fact, it would be true that there was no deadline set.
Right. So, I mean, I just say to the gentleman, I don't know what he's so excited about. I mean,
if the gentleman would yield, I don't know what was in your packet. In my packet, I received a Terry amendment, I received a Castor amendment, I received a Grayson amendment. There were data breach amendments, there were CERCLA amendments, there were amendments across the board that were submitted to the Rules Committee. Right. And the germane ones were made in order. Again, I'm not trying to argue about the underlying bill. I'm talking about the process.
Yeah, you may not have heard, Dr. Fox, what you referred to H.R. 3362 as a closed rule.
That self-executes the Terry Amendment, and that excludes the Castor Amendment, which was non-germane, and the Grayson Amendment that was non-germane.
And then H.R. 3811, closed rule.
Right, the gentleman knows well that all of the amendments submitted for H.R. 3811 were non-germane.
So the one amendment you made in order, you're self-executing.
It is. Does the gentleman dispute that all the germane amendments were made in order?
I'm just simply saying this process. Yeah, there were no. I mean, I'm just reading closed.
If folks are not going to submit amendments, I can't change that process. If we're going to call every bill that no one submits amendments for a closed rule, we can do that. Right. Okay. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
We've now had a vigorous discussion about the amendments that were not submitted or those that were, and I believe that we carefully understand that. Those in favor, we'll now call a question on the amendment from the gentlewoman from New York. Those in favor of slaughter amendment, signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no.
Roll call.
Noes have it. Noes have it. Roll call.
Ms. Fox. No. Ms. Fox, no. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, no. Mr. Cole. No. Mr. Cole, no. Mr. Woodall. No. Mr. Woodall, no. Mr. Nugent. No. Mr. Nugent, no. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, no. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. No. Ms. Ross-Leitonen, no. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, no. Ms. Slaughter.
Aye.
Ms. Slaughter, aye. Mr. McGovern. Aye. Mr. McGovern, aye. Mr. Hastings.
I need Ms. Ross-Leitonen to look at me. Aye. If she does, no, she doesn't.
Mr. Hastings, aye. Mr. Polis. Aye. Mr. Polis, aye. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, no.
Clerk will report total.
4 yeas, 9 nays.
The amendment is not agreed to. Not agreed to. Further amendment or discussion? Seeing none, the vote will now be on the motion from the gentlewoman from North Carolina. Those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.
Roll call, please.
Gentlewoman requests roll call vote.
Ms. Fox.
Aye.
Ms. Fox, aye. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, aye. Mr. Cole. Mr. Cole, aye. Mr. Woodall. Mr. Woodall, aye. Mr. Nugent. Mr. Nugent, aye. Mr. Webster. Mr. Webster, aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen. Aye. Ms. Ross-Leitonen, aye. Mr. Burgess. Mr. Burgess, aye. Ms. Slaughter.
No.
Ms. Slaughter, no. Mr. McGovern.
No.
Mr. McGovern, no. Mr. Hastings.
Nay.
Mr. Hastings, no. Mr. Polis. No. Mr. Polis, no. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Chairman, aye.
Clerk will report the total.
9 yeas, 4 nays.
The motion is agreed to. Motion is agreed to. The gentleman, Dr. Burgess, will represent Republicans.
And Congressman Jared Polis of Colorado will represent the minority.
Mr. Polis will represent the minority.
Do you anticipate another meeting this week?
In fact, I wanted to discuss that, and thank you very much. At this time, I do not anticipate us calling a meeting. With that said, however, there are, in this opening week that we're back after several weeks of being gone, a good bit of work that is being done on a bipartisan basis, on a bicameral basis. And if one of those appropriations bills or other conference reports does become available, I would advise you immediately, and we would inform the committee. But other than that, I do not have anything that will be scheduled at this time.
Thank you very much. This now closes the hearing.